We are made by their design. Genesis 1:26 through 27. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of heaven, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. So let's look at some different information pertaining to how this verse is true using our APM eyes. DNA holds the story of our ancestry. Our DNA also holds the clues about the timing of key events in human history. Molecular clocks are based on two key biological processes that are all the source of all heritable variation: mutation and recombination. Recombination, also known as crossing over, is the other main way DNA accumulates changes over time. It leads to shuffling of the two copies of the genome, one from each parent, which are bundled into chromosomes. During recombination, the corresponding homologous chromosomes line up and exchange segments, so the genome you pass on to your children is a mosaic of your parents' DNA. In cosmology, recombination refers to the epoch at which charged electrons and protons first become bound to form electrically neutral hydrogen atoms. In physics, recombination is a combining of charges or transfer of electrons in a gas that result in the neutralization of ions. Important for ions arising from the passage of high-energy particles. According to science, DNA and RNA are negatively charged molecules. Mutations are changes of DNA's genetic code. Scientists can use mutations to estimate the timing of branches in our ancestry trees. So what can cause mutations? Some occur naturally on the timing cycles of human life relating to the realm, like during the reset cycles. Others are brought about by radiation, which can attribute to nature cycles or man-made components, such as chemicals used in food growth, water treatments, and vaccines. Science says if mutations occur in the junk DNA, it can cause defects and disorders. So my question then becomes, how can it be referred to as junk DNA if it can affect how we form and function? Let's look at this article by Linda Gadboy, a spiritual scientist from Colorado Springs, Colorado. We have given this some APM corrections and correlated information that's mixed in, but the main article can be found under her name. While modern-day science used to look at DNA as a material object that was fixed in nature, therefore unable to be changed, where we were at the mercy of our genes, so to speak, we now know this isn't true. DNA is actually composed of a liquid crystalline substance that acts as a form of antenna, receiver, and transmitter of information. It's constantly in the process of taking in information from its environment and the ether as signs, archetypes, and imagery and translating it. It operates predominantly out of the radionics, where whatever frequency it's tuned to acts as a receiver for various forms of information within that same frequency that comes into an acoustic wave that serves to form an electromagnetic field as a shape that's composed initially of subtle energy, which provides the blueprint or spatial mapping for constructing an exact replica of its material equivalent. Information inherent in the ether always comes from the pairing or wave coupling, like the double helix, that contains both an acoustic sound and an optical image as the geometric patterning inherent in the vibratory frequency. The two waves of information form an interference pattern that together produce a 3D image as a subtle template for constructing the material body through a growth and development process. When one wave, the monad, resonates with another of the same or similar frequency, they are absorbed into each other, forming an interference pattern, the dyad, where certain properties are canceled out or contradicted, and others are matched and amplified. This adaptation process reformulates the initial generic form, the archetype, into a unique variation as couplings, offspring, or recombination. This reformulating of internal properties to form a new whole comes by way of what we call natural selection, as the interaction of the complementary opposites that either activate or inactivate each other. When studying DNA from a purely material perspective of constructing proteins out of encoded genetic information as the selection of quality from each parent, it was determined that only about 2% of our DNA accounted for this process, and the other 98% is what they call junk DNA, which simply meant they didn't know what it was used for. We now know that the other 98% actually serves as a form of a memory bank where information is both written or encoded and read or decoded to form a virtual reality out of the information as the pattern or configuration inherent in the vibratory frequency. This works in much the same way as the Akashic field of the esoteric sciences work, where information is contained within the astral plane as archetypical ideas that serve as a generic prototype for creating in the physical realm and are accessed and absorbed into the mind through sympathetic resonance. Within the same astral plane is also stored thought forms produced by humans as emotional memories that exist as a holographic template that's recorded on the ether or the Akashic Book of Life, and not only forms the memory of our soul and body, but also populates the astral plane of what we call the collective unconscious or mass consciousness with virtual memories. Our DNA, as a crystalline transmitter and receiver, draws in and resonates with the thought forms of others, the group mind, as well as ideas from the higher dimension of the mental plane of universal archetypes, where both come as the electromagnetic interaction that ultimately serves to program our DNA. On a side note, biochemist and photographer Lyndon Gledhill says DNA crystals form when a double helix is suspended in liquid that evaporates. They grow in patterns dictated by the information stored within the strands. Seen in cross-polarized light, they display a mind-bending kaleidoscope of color and shape. The huge range of crystals' structure is amazing. Gledhill starts by placing a highly concentrated solution of synthetic DNA under a cover slip on a slide. He uses short fragments since they tend to develop into a wider variety of forms. As the liquid evaporates, crystals begin to bloom. Gledhill uses a Canon EOS 5D Mark II camera mounted on the eyepiece to record the magical evolution at up to 10,000 times magnification. Also, Walter Russell says all matter is crystalline. So what type of matter is DNA? In short, DNA is kind of a biopolymer. It is a kind of soft matter. DNA is a nucleic acid that contains the genetic instructions used in the development and functioning of all known living organisms and some viruses. The main role of DNA molecules is the long-term storage of information. So back to the Linda article. DNA operates by the same principles as the mind and brain, where the acoustic aspect of information as words act to form visual image in the imagination that turns the idea inherent into the words into a virtual reality. It translates ideas that are communicated by talking about them, whether through our own thoughts as internal dialogue or as listening to someone else talk, into visual imagery as living scenarios. It comes as words, sentences, paragraphs, and pages of written and spoken script that form visual imagery in our mind's eye as we read it and absorb it. DNA works in the same principle as the mind and neurons in the brain and body. It decodes words into 3D realities as the basis for organizing matter into the biological form that corresponds to the image of an archetypical idea. This is represented in sacred geometry by the tetrad, the tetragrammaton, which is the physical outward reflection and projection of the triad, the inner imagining, that emerges naturally out of the dyad, which symbolizes an interference pattern as the coupling of the two waveforms, the double helix, of the same frequency to produce a whole new thorough coherence. Most spiritual texts describe God as the creator, calling forth all material life, using words as breath that move across the water, the liquid crystal, causing a form to rise up and take shape. This would be going back to the Milky Way, with the positive and negative switching and programming our DNA growth and function. This is what we can see and decode from our own research and translate it into more understandable terms as you now have the cause for such effects. While the genetic makeup of our body doesn't change much through our lifetime, our inner constitution, as our character and mental paradigm vibratory structure, can often change quite drastically. As our inner constitution changes, how we see and what we see in the outer world changes simultaneously. This is because the inner and outer act as two waveforms that resonate with each other, forming an interference pattern that activates different aspects while deactivating others, changing how it's configured. We only see in everything else what's of the same nature, frequency as we are. As we grow, develop into higher states, and transform mentally and emotionally, how things appear to us change accordingly. You know when you've undergone transformation of some form by the fact that you begin to see others and the world in general in a different way. What we notice and how we interpret things to give them meaning changes as an outer reflection of an inner state. DNA, like the mind, is a fluid-like substance that's always being reformed as an energetic change of subtle energy, with everything around it that's of similar vibration causing it to constantly flux and morph. It's like a shimmering luster, morphing moment by moment based on what new information or qualities it's absorbing from the environment that modifies its state. Words carried on certain frequency are naturally inducted into the individual mind, where they form an internal image as the reality indicated by the words. Whenever our mind is in a passive receptive state, such as meditation and hypnosis, the theta alpha state, there are no editing or resistance from the conscious mind or outer awareness. Ideas are readily taken in as suggestions, allowed to rise up in the imagination and take hold, and entire realities as an experience are constructed out of them. These realities create a form of inner experience that acts directly on the subconscious mind as the body's consciousness, the DNA, to program it through our DNA memories. Genetic memory is a phenomenon in which certain kinds of memories could be inherited, being represented at birth in the absence of any associated sensory experience, that such memories could be incorporated into the genome over long spans of time. Neuroscientific research on mice suggests that some experiences can influence subsequent generations. In 2013 study, mice trained to fear a specific smell passed on their trained aversion to their descendants, which were then extremely sensitive and fearful to the same smell, even though they had never encountered it, nor had been trained to fear it. Changes in the brain structure were also found. The researcher concluded that the experiences of the parent, even before conceiving, markedly influenced both structure and function in the nervous system of the subsequent generations. Scientists speculate that similar genetic mechanisms could be linked with phobias, anxieties, and post-traumatic stress disorders, as well as other neuropsychiatric disorders in humans. Publishing recent findings in the journal Translational Psychiatry, the researchers outlined how they investigated genetic changes seen in epigenetic patterns by studying maternal stress experience during pregnancy in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The researchers gathered saliva samples from a total of 386 people, grandmothers, their daughters, and grandchildren. They also collected information from the grandmothers, daughters, and their experiences of violence within their partnerships and communities before, during, and after pregnancy. Combining both data sets, the researchers were able to make predictions about the DNA of grandchildren of those grandmothers who had experienced violence while pregnant with the mothers. For 5 locations within circulatory regulation genes, they were able to conclude that violence experienced during pregnancy leads to a different DNA activity in children, known as methylations, whereby the genome reacts to the environment by activating or deactivating genes. The methylation took place regardless of whether or not the violent source was a partner or came from within the wider community. Methylation is considered an epigenetic mechanism, as it is not the genetic sequence itself which is altered, but rather the legibility or activity of the coded information. Methylation patterns are an evolutionary device which make it easier for an organism to adapt to its environment. In this instance, the researchers' hypothesis that methylation patterns might result in children more fearful or alternatively more aggressive as an adaptive behavioral response. The researchers suggest that in the future, prenatal DNA methylation patterns could be used as biomarkers for psychological health risk and risk to psychiatric disorders. Matter, as particles held together by an invisible electromagnetic field, is what form the primary substance of what we call reality. Matter itself doesn't possess or generate consciousness of its own, but acts as the passive receptor for consciousness as vibratory information that structures it into the holistic biological living system. DNA acts as the subtle antenna and receiver for acoustic information that forms an image as an electromagnetic field that provides the blueprints as an etheric body used to construct the physical body. Form and properties always indicate function and how a system operates and behaves. Whenever we change the information used to structure and operate a system, we change how the system forms, expresses, and functions as a whole. The genetic code of our DNA isn't static or fixed, but rather dynamic and always in the process of transforming based on the information as language of some sorts that it acts to absorb, interpret, and shape into an idea. We are all electric creatures floating in the electric sea of this electric universe. Every electric thing in the entire universe breathes electricity into itself from the rest of the electric universe, which is outside itself. It also breathes out of itself into the rest of the universe. Dr. Walter Russell. Scalar energy, as subtle energy, readily moves through and into matter that divides, forming an electromagnetic field that serves to organize astral light as essence, photons, into the reality as one possibility, the potential, inherent in scalar waves. Scalar waves exist as a unified field of subtle energy that exists everywhere as what we call empty space. This empty space isn't empty at all, but rather filled with information as archetypes used to form, hold together, and sustain the entire material world. This empty space would be our ether, or aka dark matter. It is a visible field of electromagnetic created by the little gods that organize matter into organic and inorganic biological systems that are comprised of both active, positive, and electric energy, which is the dyad. This is the animate. This is our atom. And passive, magnetic, which is the monad, which is the inanimate, and this is our Eve aspects. What this shows us is that our DNA, as our subconscious mind or body consciousness, is literally programmed by our thoughts and internal dialogue that are imagined as realities, and from various forms of media that act as suggestions and become the nature of our thoughts. What we hear outwardly forms a picture of reality inwardly. This inward picture, formed out of hearing something someone says, becomes a part of our thoughts and provides a holographic image that imprints the DNA of our body with that information as a form of the genetic code. DNA, like the mind itself, has the ability to both write and read genetic information. Most of our thoughts are formed from what we've been taught or heard being said that we incorporate in a harmonious fashion to form our mental paradigm as a working model for perceiving and interpreting the outer world. Any information sent on radio microwaves in the form of language and pictures that we take in and think about not only becomes part of our vibratory essence in terms of our thinking and feeling, but also as the programming for DNA of our molecular structure as a corresponding physical equivalent of, or the reality inherent of thoughts. As we think through a form of internal dialogue, when we're talking to ourselves or whatever we hear and listen going on around us that we take in and actually think about, turning it into an imagined reality, we are encoding ourselves with this information as a form of hypnotic suggestion. The most important aspect of our physical development and well-being comes from our thoughts and what type of ideas we expose ourselves to, actively engage in. Anytime we are watching TV, listening to the radio, music, talking on our cell phones, browsing the internet, reading, and watching things, we are programming ourselves with that information. We are becoming one with it by creating an inner reality out of it. We're tuning ourselves to that same vibration. What we hear and watch becomes a part of our natural thoughts. All we're ever really doing is running the same type of ideas through our mind over and over, changing them only through adaptive resonance as a modified application to a different or unique scenario. The most important aspect of our personal development is controlling our own thoughts, intentionally directing our attention onto desirable and beneficial ideas and monitoring what we expose ourselves to in the terms of others and various forms of media. Whomever or whatever we associate with, we take in and become like. Spoken words, whether internally or externally, form holographic images in our mind that are impressed on the ether and permanently recorded as memory. Just as we live out of our life out of memory, thinking and dwelling in the past as a way of creating the future in the present by using the same idea to create a new variation, our body is regenerated and sustained out of the same memory. The mind forms an astral image as a hologram that imprints the etheric body with the information of that image. The etheric body, as an electromagnetic field, uses the same imagery to organize and animate the cellular structure of a body to form corresponding metaphorical equivalent. The parallel planes that ultimately result in our physical body operate as a form of step-down process or phases in vibration, becoming a material form through a chain of association as charged plasma that organizes essence in the form of gas and coagulates into a liquid light form and ultimately results in a solid form. The causal field of the luminiferous aether or Akashic field of vibratory frequencies as archetypical information is absorbed into our mind and shaped into a personal reality that simultaneously elicits an emotional response to our own thoughts, infusing them with the meaning that becomes the motivating force that animates them into a storyline or dialogue of some kind. This imagery sensory reality is simultaneously received by, interpreted, and used to produce an equivalent effect in the etheric hologram of the body, reprogramming and modifying it accordingly. Our mind receives information that turns it into emotional thought that acts as a blueprint for shaping our material body both inwardly and outwardly. We literally become what we think and imagine. So, all this is saying is our bodies are running on a biological energy grid system, just as the Creator designed us to be. We are made from their image in the same aspects and points of the realm. The ancient Chinese called this our Qi. Qigong practice shows us that the concept of Qi can contain information, consciousness, and other factors that the concept of energy does not seem to include. The human's body energy system is related to its material system. The material system of the human body refers to the different levels of physical structure, including the material composition of genes, organs, and limbs at microscopic and macroscopic levels, as well as histology and embryology. The energy system is a dynamic system that maintains and influences human life activities, including energy operations from microscopic to macroscopic levels, such as chemical energy released by the mitochondria and enzymes, heat generated by food, and gravitational and electromagnetic energy generated by the moon's waxing and waning and sunspot activities. Studies of the human body by biomedicine and modern science focus on the material system, which is characterized by interconnection between tangible entities. In contrast, the energy system is a system in which intangible forces interact with each other. Any living body simultaneously contains a material system and an energy system, just as shapes and their shadows are inextricably linked. As all material and structural components of the body have their corresponding energetic components, material components move owing to the action of the energetic components and form functions, the life activities of a human body. The body's organs also have their own Qi, such as the heart Qi, the liver Qi, and spleen Qi. Another type of ki is the external ki, which can be emitted from the body by some individuals, such as Qigong practitioners. We can see that the location and operation of energy does not always have clear boundaries, just as electrical energy can spread both through wires and wirelessly. This wireless energy can be felt, for example, when we enter a room and can feel the mood or energy level, the happiness, sadness, excitement, and tension of others, or even past events that have occurred. This would have a connection with haunted areas as well, when we can sense the remnants of the energy left behind, since materials can absorb said energies. So, at this point, I'm going to wrap up this presentation. I hope after using our APM eyes, we can relate how we were made in their image. The image of the angels is one that has been misinterpreted over time, and we at APM are attempting to straighten this out. If you have any comments, please feel free to leave them for us to further discuss this topic, as it is a very large, complex topic that this barely scratched the surface of.